Welcome to Direction Northeast. Hello, I'm Abby Hathorn. This program is a presentation of the Communications Department of Northeast State Community College. This episode of Direction Northeast talks about sex and consent. We will explore the responsibilities that men have in preventing domestic abuse and rape.
Our family gets together nearly every weekend. We laugh together, we enjoy each other, we have quality time together, and Northeast State has afforded us those opportunities. I'm a graduate of Northeast State, and my husband's a graduate of Northeast State, and both of our children chose to go to Northeast State. And I think it's because it provided us with an affordable quality education, and it was a wonderful experience. I'm Susan Graybill, and our whole family got our start at Northeast State.
Our guest is instrumental in founding Check Your Mail Standing with Survivors, an organization which takes a candid look at how men can become advocates for ending sexual assault in their communities. We will discuss current issues tied to sexual assault awareness, violence prevention, healthy relationships, and loving kindness. Graham Hackett, welcome to Direction Northeast.
Thank you very much.
For starters, why don't you tell us a little bit about Check Your Mail and its mission?
So it came to my attention that sexual violence is largely regarded as a women's issue. And after doing a little bit of research and homework about the magnitude of this crisis, it came very clear that it's actually not a women's issue at all. If anything, it's a men's issue. And it is a privilege that men take for granted that they don't really have to deal with sexual violence as long as it's framed as a women's issue, because it's not our thing at that point. But that needs to change for the health of our communities and the women that we love in our lives.
Oh, I completely agree. Lots of women are advocates for sexual assault and rape prevention, but what is so important about men becoming involved in your opinion?
Absolutely. 99% of the violence perpetrated in America and honestly in the world is perpetrated by men. And so to treat this like a women's issue and opt men out of that conversation is actually detrimental to seeking solutions. If the perpetrators are not even involved in the conversation, there's no way that, that we can actually heal as a community. So I just feel like conscious men need to step up, and they really need to get in the conversation, acknowledge the fact that their gender is almost exclusively the one that is perpetrating this particular type of violence, and join with women and join with survivors and women's groups in order to become advocates for women's safety. Exactly,
and being passionate about that is extremely important, I think, on both sides. When you say that it's a men's issue, more specifically, why do you say that?
I mean, honestly, it's just the fact that the media frames it too often as a women's issue allows men to not have to feel like they have a relationship to it. But if men are the perpetrators, and honestly, I think what it really comes down to is this. Men all over the world have women in their lives that they love. You know, whether it's their mother, their sister, their girlfriend, their wife, and maybe even someday their daughters. To opt out of the conversation simply because you're a man and you think that this is a women's issue is a disrespect to the women that we care about. And we need men's effort and energy in this conversation to become proactive advocates for safety so that we can actually shift the thinking in our communities and ultimately our culture towards a healthier way of relating to each other.
Exactly, and I think that's extremely important and great that you're pushing that subject as well. We hear about rape culture and sexual assault on campuses all the time. Our parents, our teachers, our administrators are always telling us women to, be careful or how to get out of a situation. But no one's really talking about why that problem is continuing to grow and why we're hearing more about it. But in your opinion, why do you think that rape culture, in a sense, is growing and becoming more popular?
There are a lot of contributing factors, I think. A lot of it is the very poor, if not just abysmal, standards of sex education as we grow up as young people. I know that for my own part, I had about 5 weeks of sitting in a middle school classroom with people that would rather be anywhere else in the entire world than watching a gym teacher put a condom on a banana, and that's all the sexual education we get, and it's grossly inadequate. And so there was no conversation about consent in the context. There's no conversation about what having your sexual identity, what that actually means, But there are a lot of different cues that we get throughout our culture from parents, from media, from all these different, outlets that want to define what a man is supposed to be about. And a lot of those cues are really off base. A lot of them have to do with being tough, being aggressive, not showing emotion. And ultimately, those are all breakdowns in communication. And ultimately, that's actually not how a lot of men actually are intrinsically. So in order for men to be true to themselves and to honestly contribute to a healthier society, we need to shift the thinking about what masculinity means so that men can be whole and complete and fully educated about their role in society.
What would you say was your turning point when you decided to become a male advocate for this type of thing?
Interestingly, I've been doing a lot of social justice work over the past many years, and even though I knew that I had a relationship to this issue, and I knew that I was against sexual violence altogether, and I had that it was very obvious to me that I was against it. I didn't become an advocate until someone actually invited me to build this program. And it was at that point that I started doing research to realize that just having a passive relationship to sexual violence in our culture wasn't enough at all. Honestly, doing the research, I realized that this is not just a problem that is exclusive to colleges. It is not just an issue for a random circumstance of a woman in a back alley getting jumped out at by someone hiding in the shadows. That this is actually a cultural epidemic. And the more that I learned about it, the more passionate I became. And I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to encourage other men to join the movement to end sexual violence.
I think that's super important too, to have someone who's passionate about the subject to also push other people to become so passionate about a problem that needs to be fixed. Do you think that the misconception about sexual assault has caused other issues in how we relate to it or how we perceive it as a society?
The misconception about sexual assault? How do you mean?
Like where you think that it's just done this way, like it's just somewhere someone jumps out in the alley at a woman.
Absolutely, yeah. There are lots of misconceptions about rape. The main one, I think, would be exactly that, where the stereotype is the girl who's too drunk and wearing a skirt that's too short getting attacked by a stranger in a dark place. But the fact is that the circumstances are much, much broader than that, and the majority of sexual assaults that are happening are perpetrated by acquaintances of the women that are being attacked. So acquaintance rape and substance-facilitated rape are actually much more prominent than strangers jumping out at people in dark alleys. So that whole way of thinking about things needs to shift so that people realize that consent education for men and for everyone is very important in formative years, so that this idea that somebody that you know would never do that, when really, it's very important to recognize just how people are communicating with each other can validate unhealthy modes of behavior. This idea that it would never happen to me because I don't perpetrate those behaviors. I don't act that way, so I would never be involved in that. It's short-sighted, and it's nobody's fault, really. They're just misled because there's poor education. I feel like despite the efforts of conscious parents trying to bestow these ideas to their kids, they're not really equipped because the generations are so different than they ever were. And I think the influences of media really can't be overstated. We live in a media-saturated culture, and all of the cues and prompts that we're getting about how to act and how to be men and women just don't really line up with the truth of how people actually live and feel. And there's a lot of work that we need to do. So it's time to get to it.
In your opinion, what are the easy ways for men to get involved with making their campuses conscious of this matter?
Sure. A variety of different ways. First and foremost, I would say that being able to hold space for women as advocates, being prepared to listen and not inject ideas and actually get information from women is one of the foundational ways to become an advocate that knows what they're talking about, and that's very important. Proactively educating yourself, I think, is very important. There are near limitless resources in the internet and beyond. I think just learning more about what's going on. There are a variety of different survivors groups and women's groups and online resources that you can become a part of to open a conversation and stay in it and learn more. And I think ultimately expanding one's vocabulary to be able to have a more nuanced understanding of the causes and of the impacts that sexual violence have on your local community will compel men to want to take care of the women in their lives and want to also compel other men not to be so violent and not to just ruin the fabric of our culture. I think that men do actually care. I think a lot of men really do care, but the education has been poor, and it's on us to now step up and get in the game.
You've worked with different youth organizations and things throughout your years in this type of career, but how would you say that those experiences have helped you with your current situation? Sure.
Well, a lot of what I did in the past has informed this particular project. As a free speech advocate, I really feel like, getting this topic and topics like this away from taboo and into the light, and really making sure that there are platforms for people to speak on these sensitive ideas and feel like they're being heard. I feel like that's very important. I also built a program working with juvenile inmates, young men, and offering them communication skills. And being able to witness them in a very confined environment and looking at how all these status games happen among men and what being a man meant to young men with formative ideas and all the cues that they were taking from each other and from popular music and from wherever they could get it. I learned a lot from how they were trying to figure everything out and how challenging it was for them to try and make sure that they had the right type of pride to stand up tall and feel like they were being a man. And I also got to see a lot of how violence played into that. And it's an unfortunate byproduct of an unhealthy pride that many men are expected to have in our culture. So all of these things have informed the Check Your Mail program, and now I'm very grateful to be able to speak to college-age youth because these are the years that are considered the red zone for sexual assault. And with an epidemic of this size, these are the critical years. I hope that we can get enough momentum under it to actually turn the corner and make some change on these campuses.
You talk about how important it is to having these healthy relationships and building those types of relationships. But what is one component, gender aside, that everyone can do to have that type of healthy relationship to prevent having any kind of violence?
I think, in a word, if I could sum it all up, I think empathy is really the critical component for a healthy relationship. The idea that one can experience how someone else is feeling and really identify with them. I think that if there was a more empathy in our culture in general, I feel like if we had more education around how to communicate effectively and relate to each other, that I think that would reduce violence dramatically. There's an artist that I really respect, and he says that the biggest threat to mankind is the indifference to each other's suffering. And really, this apathy, you do you and I'll be over here, is really damaging and especially when it comes to intimate relationships. We have to find new and more inclusive ways to relate to each other so that we can identify with each other more, and with that higher degree of empathy, I think violence would dramatically decrease.
Do you think the reason why maybe sexual assault and sexual violence is becoming more prominent is because men don't believe that empathy is manly, so to speak?
It is considered largely a feminine characteristic. Men, a lot of the social cues that men are getting are about you don't show emotion. You don't go out of your way to try and communicate more. A lot of it is about being stoic and steadfast and holding on to your beliefs without letting anything influence them. And I think that's actually really dangerous. I don't think a lot of men believe that intrinsically about themselves at all. But I think that just based on the ways that we're taught to communicate and the ways that we're taught to behave, there's a filter, there's a barrier that prevents empathy from really, coming into itself and being an effective tool for communication.
How big of a role would you say that the media influences on that attitude?
Now more than ever, hands down. This generation is so saturated in media that without effective information coming from our educational system that really can inform us about these issues, I think that the generational gap with parents is problematic. I think the media is increasingly relied upon to learn about how we're supposed to behave and what we're supposed to believe. And now that we have movies and television and video games and apps and 24-hour access to the internet, which provides an immense amount of stimuli, it's more confusing than ever. There's more information available than ever. And so I think a lot of men are doing their best, but it is really confusing. The counterpoint to that is that this access to the media is also potentially an answer. If you have access to new information, you can generate new ideas. If you can validate that information with other sources, then you can learn things and cultivate a belief system that is more realistic to what's actually going on between people, as opposed to just accepting whatever is being thrown at you.
I completely agree. When you're talking about the loving and kindness, whenever you're applying that to a relationship or even to a friendship or to strangers on the street, what kind of role does that play in Check Your Mail?
It's the backbone of it, honestly. I mean, talking about empathy as not such a masculine trait, love is widely regarded as weakness. And this is an extremely unfortunate development for our culture that it has come to this. We're widely regarded as a hyper-violent culture. Men are the perpetrators of a lot of that. But I think that completely belies the fact that men do sincerely love the women in their lives. I think that even though not every man is going to have a healthy relationship with their mother or their family, that there is a caring that is going to happen with most men for their family, at least. And then extrapolating that out from there, whatever they can learn in their formative years from their family, once they start to engage in intimate relationships, I feel like the desire for love, to be loved and to share love, is just as real as every other emotion that a man feels, even if it's not, even if it's not like represented well by the media, or if there are not a lot of prominent examples of role models who put love as a paramount factor of how they operate and how they behave. I think that a lot of men still desire love and feel it and want to make it a big part of their lives. And I think that increasingly we're going to have that opportunity to cultivate new ideas as information becomes more accessible. And hopefully love will get back to headlining our entire identity.
Well, that would be great. What is the most challenging part you have with getting men involved with Check Your Mail?
Getting in the room in the first place. The topic of sexual violence is such a taboo that, first of all, sex is challenging for people to talk about in the first place. Our culture does not foster open conversation about sex or sexuality. I can speak from my own experience. I was not brought up necessarily in a way that this was a common conversation that was happening, for friends or family or in school or any other context. So it was a lot of just figuring it out for myself. And then when it comes to violence, it's a very, very heavy topic. Rape, just as a word, has impact on people. They're just like, I don't want any of that. Please keep that away from me. I'm trying to be happy over here, right? The problem with that is that survivors don't have that option. They don't have the option to just disregard this issue. And I feel like it's time. This has reached epidemic crisis proportions, and it's time to shift the conversation. Excuse me.
So you're the son of a Vietnam veteran and a hippie nomad. How big of an impact? I think that's awesome. How big of an impact do you think that may have had on your advocacy and all those things?
Well, I mean, it's where I come from. So, being the son of a Vietnam veteran and a hippie nomad, very polar ends of the cultural experience. My father actually had witnessed so much violence in his life that he couldn't justify bringing any more life into the world. So before I was born, he left. So that influence and lack of person in that role has had a massive impact on me. And it made me relate to the world and the military and our government and our society in a very palpable way. Conversely, my mom was a dyed-in-the-wool, tie-dye wearing, Grateful Dead loving hippie who really, has an extremely kind heart and different beliefs entirely about how people can interact through love and through just kindness. She was a very, very kind person. Coming out of that era, she also had a lot of addiction issues. So her lifestyle also didn't serve me in a lot of ways as well. But from these different perspectives, I just gained an acute awareness of cultural development, of how society is, building upon our history and what opportunities we have from this generation moving forward. It's always been a big part of my life.
Out of all the awesome things that you do with Check Your Mail, what would you say is your most favorite or the one you get most reward out of?
I like it when the lecture turns into a conversation. I really like being able to share my stories and my ideas and the research that I've done and having it resonate with somebody to the point where they are comfortable and confident enough to share their ideas in the context of Check Your Mail program. That back and forth and that willingness, that braveness, once that shows up during the presentation, that's my favorite moment. And I really hope to facilitate more of that and ultimately hope that the conversation goes beyond the program and is ongoing with the students I have the opportunity to speak with.
So would you say that communication is key with getting men to feel like it's okay to get involved with this and it's okay to feel that empathy and that type of thing?
Communication is key, absolutely. And again, like the hardest part obviously is the taboo around it and that discussing feelings is not a masculine thing. Getting men to recognize that it's actually really awesome to join the team with the good guys. That would be my favorite takeaway if I could really instill that in whoever engages the Check Your Mail program. I feel like becoming a proactive advocate for safety, there is a reward of knowing that if you've made even a small difference in the way that somebody uses their language so that it's less violent or perpetrates sexist ideas or anything like that, that you can be really confident that you've done something good that is helping someone, is helping survivors to know that we're in this together and really as a community we can shift the culture, we can shift away from rape culture into something much more healthy, and ultimately I think everyone will be happier and having better relationships.
Oh, absolutely, and doesn't everybody want to be happier?
Right?
With that said, have you always been involved with social justice issues and advocacy?
It has been a big compulsion of mine, obviously from the parents that I had, and I've had a lot of different markers on my life's path. I was in New York for 9/11 and saw the towers fall. I worked with juvenile inmates, and that is a huge, mass incarceration is a huge issue, and I learned a lot about that from being inside of that situation. And I've collaborated with the ACLU and built programs to try and recognize the value of free speech so that all different kinds of voices with all different kinds of causes can be heard and should be heard. There's a strange reward that comes just with knowing that I'm helping to forward these causes for good because I like people. I really like people. I think our culture can be a lot happier and a lot healthier. And so with art and with social justice, I feel like we have the tools that we need to move us forward into a better age.
If you could give one piece of advice to all the men that may or may not even come and listen to it, but if you could just give any man any advice, what would it be?
Two things, actually. One is, we have to face hard truths. The numbers are staggering as far as sexual violence is concerned in this country, and we have to face it. Turning a blind eye is unacceptable at this point, and if you are thinking that you are just going to be passive and keep it at arm's length, then you are actually part of the problem, and that needs to change. And so facing the hard truths and then doing something. It could be really simple. It could be simply like being prepared to listen to a woman's experience when they felt threatened. Or it could be stepping in when somebody makes a crass comment about, casually, I'm gonna rape that girl, and saying that's not okay with me. Do something. And then I would hope that you'll go the extra mile and actually gather people, form groups, be advocates, and shift your community at a larger level.
With that said, what is another way that even if a man has no clue or he has this media idea about what sexual assault is, what's just one way he can easily step away from the problem and not joining in on it?
Sure. Being conscious of one's language, I think, is probably the simplest way. Being aware of one's own language. The language around sex is strangely, and again, it could be a media influence. I'm not sure exactly where it came from, but, saying things simply that are commonplace at this point, like, I'd hit that, or I'm going to smash that, or I'm going to beat that up. Like, when talking about sex, actually connotates that sex and violence are one and the same. And casually talking about rape and casually discussing, how slutty someone is or anything like that. These things need to be shifted away from in our common dialogue. And so it's a really easy thing to do for yourself in your own language, to recognize the words that you're using and the impact that they can have. And then it's not a short leap to be someone who is going to call somebody else out on their language and just say, listen, I don't get behind how you said that. I think that it is potentially dangerous, and it'd be cool if you would try something else.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Graham, for talking with me about this today. Thank you. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up Direction Northeast.
My name is Anthony Adams, and I'm IT support specialist at Northeast State Community College, which is also where I got my start. If I could offer any advice to anyone out there that's looking to pursue their education, my advice to you is just do it. Once you talk to someone here, you will see how easy it is to communicate with the employees here, and they're very willing and helpful to get you on your way to pursue your career.
That concludes the program for today. We have talked with guest Graham Hackett about men standing with survivors to create a culture of consent to end sexual violence. Community is very important to the students at Northeast State Community College, and this program takes a look at a few of the subjects they find important. Until we meet next time, on behalf of the students, staff, and faculty of Northeast State Community College, I'm Abby Hathorn, and this is Direction Northeast.